Welcome to your Daily Detroit for Thursday, August 15th, 2019. I'm Sven Gustafson.
And I'm Jer Stays. Sven, man, it is good to see you. I hope up north was, well, beautifully up northy.
Indeed it was, Jer. Indeed it was. Not long enough, but vacations never are, right?
Oh, never is, but it is good to see you. Today's episode hits on three topics. First, journalist Darren Nichols joins us to add context around a racially charged incident in Royal Oak that's made national headlines. Second, the drama around who will be Oakland County Executive next, well, it continues. And third, Detroit City FC finally has a plan to go pro, and Sven will tell you all about it. That's coming up right after word from our episode sponsor, Milo.agency. Daily Detroit is brought to you in part by Milo, a full-service digital marketing agency. Milo takes your campaign from concept to finish with quality strategy and implementation. You can learn more about them at Milo.agency. Near downtown Royal Oak, a controversial incident happened Tuesday evening that's gone viral online and made national headlines. Multiple white Royal Oak police officers stopped Devin Myers, a 20-year-old black man, on 4th Street. He was reportedly on his way to a date at the in-season cafe. Why did they stop him? Because, according to a Facebook Live video and observers on the scene, an unidentified white woman called 911 saying Myers looked suspiciously at her. Myers was questioned for about a half hour before being allowed to continue on his way by police. Royal Oak police haven't been offering comment, but we here at Daily Detroit received a statement from the office of Mike Fournier, the mayor of Royal Oak. In it, he acknowledged racial bias exists and that there is more work both officers and the community could do, and that they are in the process of evaluating what mistakes have been made and that they will own them.
Joining us to talk about this is Darren Nichols. He's a former Detroit news reporter who covered City Hall, and he is the host of the Beyond the Headlines podcast. He was nice enough to have us on his show. Darren, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Thank you for having me.
So what are your thoughts about this story? A depressingly familiar one, I guess.
It is. I mean, we have seen a number of these incidents happen across the country. Last year, it was a young man in Cleveland who was accosted by the police, or at least approached by the police when he was cutting his lawn. He was a 12-year-old young man. You're talking about a gentleman by the name of Antoine Rose, who unfortunately was killed in Pittsburgh because of his run-in with police. So it's all too familiar for people of color when they deal with these kinds of issues. In this case, it does remind me of a similar incident happened with Dennis Archer Jr. back in the early 2000s.
The son of the former Detroit mayor,
the son
Dennis
of
Archer.
the former, yes. And so he was pulled over. I don't know exactly the particulars at this point because it's been almost 20 years. But what I do recall happened was that he was pulled out of the car and he was made to be on the street. And I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, they pointed guns to his head. And so it sounds eerily familiar to that case. And, you know, I wrote about these kind of incidents last year as a part of the Antoine Rose situation. And I'll read you a little bit of what I wrote at that time. And this is how a lot of African-American men and women who deal with African-American men deal with. And it reads...
And we should make clear for our listeners, too, that you are African-American.
Yes, I am. I'm an African-American male, and I've had these incidents happen with me. This was an op-ed that I wrote for the Pittsburgh Tribune last year, and it reads, "If it's Trayvon Martin, we relate. If it's Rose or Philando Castro, it reminds folks of traffic stops where the outcome could have led to their death. If it's Ronisha McBride, it's a reminder of a time we were stranded in the snow or rain and simply needed help. Instead, she was shot for knocking on the wrong door. But with cell phones all equipped with cameras and social media posts, it gets overwhelming. Cable news shows which discuss these issues 24/7 on a 24/7 cycle don't help either." So the point that I'm trying to make with all of these things is that when these incidents happen, it's always a reminder for people of color that all of the other incidents that have occurred across the country.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that you yourself have experienced something like this. Actually, it sounds quite a bit more harrowing than what this man experienced here in Royal Oak.
Yes, I write about it in this column. I mean, we talk about a number of different incidents that happened with me in that piece, but one of the more egregious incidents was when I was a freshman in college at Wayne State University. I was coming home, ironically, from a college party. And that was when Greg's Pizza just opened on the other side of the street, and the McDonald's was where it is now. And it usually would stay open real late. So I'm looking to see which one is open. I look to my right and the McDonald's is closed. So I look to my left to see if Greg's Pizza was open so that I could try to get something to eat after a party. I drive down the street. The police officers thought that I was looking suspicious. And as a result, they pulled me over with their weapons drawn. And they ordered me out of the car, and they searched my car without my permission. I didn't have enough sense to say that what they were doing was illegal, but since they pointed a gun at my head, that wasn't anything that I really was, consciously thinking about. I really was trying to get out of that situation.
Sure.
And so fortunately, I got out of that situation safe with no harm. I was concerned whether the police department was going to place something in my car and put me under arrest. But we're also talking about, this was back in the late 80s. So we're at the height of the gang and drug problems that were going on in the city of Detroit too. Mm-hmm. So you have to put it in its full context. Yes, I was a good kid who was in college, right? Mm-hmm. But there were also a lot of people that were doing, you're talking about the YPI, you're talking about the Finkel Boys, you're talking about, the BK gangs and the 8 Mile Smurfs and all of these other gangs that were going on just in my immediate neighborhood. But just because I was a good kid, that doesn't mean that they assume that every kid is a good kid.
Yeah. And were the officers in that case, were they white?
They were both African-American,
really?
If I can remember correctly.
Wow.
Yes.
So just it almost doesn't matter who the police are sometimes.
No, I mean, I think there is race does play a factor. Let's be clear. Mm-hmm. In some of these instances, race does play a factor in what is going on. But you can't say in every situation it's just what white cops are doing to African-American males, because there are also black cops. It's also about blue and the blue wall of silence that is going on in communities as well. It's just all of these things have been going on for as long as I can remember. I mean, you're talking about the Big Four. You're talking about stress in Detroit. Like, all of these things have gone on. There were just no cell phones. Rodney King wouldn't have been caught if someone didn't videotape it.
I mean, everybody talks about the rebellion in the 1960s, but people forget about 1943. And I thought about 1943 today because of this incident, because it was a white woman who called the police on a black man. Well, in 1943, when 100,000 people were coming off of Belle Isle at once, there was a rumor, a false rumor, that a white woman was raped by a black man. And that kicked off a multi-day riot where, I think it's 25 African Americans, 9 whites, tons of property was destroyed. It was something that got national headlines in the middle of World War II, in the middle of this time where everyone's saying this was Detroit's heyday as the arsenal of democracy. We still were having this out in the streets racial strife. This is something that follows our community and is intertwined with our history as a region.
Yes, you're absolutely correct. I mean, I think that's the misnomer about what people think about 67, was because the issues that happened in 43 didn't just walk away after 43.
They got worse.
They got worse, right? And so all of the issues that were facing Detroit continue to exist in Detroit as of 67. And you're talking about 2 months before 67 was when 2 young black kids were killed at Rouge Park, and their car ran out of gas, and they were looking for, some help on that particular day. And I remember as a child, my dad telling me this story, right? And I'm like, why are you telling me this story? What does it mean? And it wasn't until I really started to research, because my dad used to always say, you just can't trust everybody. You cannot trust everybody you see. You're trying to look for help, and you just can't trust everybody you see. You know what I mean? That sort of thing. And so for me, it wasn't until I started researching the 67 riots and the things that led up to the 67 riots. It was like a light bulb went off in my head when I read that story. It was like, oh, this is what my dad was talking about, because it made it real to him. And he used that to make it real for me.
And you're starting to see these kinds of incidents more in the suburbs. I mean, I had even seen some stuff on the east side of Macomb County, a few other things. One of the things that strikes me is that you've got such demographic changes in Metro Detroit. And I feel like I got my first clue of this when I did a post that was just an animated GIF or GIF of the changes in demographics over the last 10, 15 years in Metro Detroit, and seeing how things are changing north of 8 Mile, how people are talking about how 696 is the new 8 Mile. You have conversations in places like Warren, like you don't go south of 696, or that's what people say. I wonder if we are in a position where, not in the city, but in the suburbs, are we going to see more incidents like this? Because the reaction that I saw online to just the data was stunning and strong and intense in a way that made me remind of the things that I read in history books. When you read Thomas Segru and all of those other folks, I really think Origins of the Urban Crisis is something, if you're interested in this topic, is a must read.
Absolutely.
The same words are being used today that were being used back then, but it's not in the city of Detroit. It's in the inner ring suburbs.
Yes. I think the issue with a lot of the communities in the inner ring suburbs or further out is the number of African-American officers they have on their staffs as well. You have to learn how to change your demographic as a police department as your area becomes more diverse. You can't have a 95% white police force in an area where your demographic numbers are shifting to 50-50. And so the police department should be reflective, in my estimation, and I know that it's difficult, but I think the demographic of your police department should reflect the community upon which you're in. And I think that's the key to being a good administrator, is knowing how to change with the times and knowing how to adapt to what is going on.
All right, that's Darren Nichols. He hosts the Beyond the Headlines podcast. Darren Nichols, thanks so much for coming into Daily Detroit.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
There's more news emerging from the ongoing saga over how to fill the remaining term of Ella Brooks Patterson, the late Oakland County Executive. The Freep reports that the former chairman of the County Board of Commissioners, Dave Woodward, plans to rescind his resignation from the board and reassume his position as chair. Woodward, a Democrat, had resigned from the board in order to be appointed to fill the remainder of Patterson's term as county executive through 2020. That left the board deadlocked at 10 Democrats and 10 Republicans. His resignation also set off infighting among Democrats. Oakland County Treasurer Andy Meisner is also interested in running for the county exec position. Republicans, meanwhile, have said former Deputy Gerald Poisson should continue to serve as executive throughout the remainder of the term. It's unclear what happens next. The board next meets Friday morning to vote on appointing a new county executive. It's been a bit of a roller coaster ride this season for Detroit City FC, but the 8-year-old club says it has finally found a path to professional soccer. The National Independent Soccer Association, the new third division of professional soccer in the U.S., said on Thursday it has accepted City's application to join the league starting in spring 2020. The move means Le Rouge will become a fully professional club with paid players and travel throughout the country. City's application still needs to undergo a final review by the U.S. Soccer Federation, the governing panel. City has already wrapped up its regular season and crashed out of the National Premier Soccer League playoffs last month when it lost to Cleveland SC in the Midwest Regional Finals. But the club begins its first fall season and kicks off the 6-team NPSL Members Cup tournament Saturday when it hosts Chattanooga FC, with matches scheduled well into October. That tournament was originally supposed to be called the NPSL Founders Cup. It was meant to be a path to professional soccer, but those plans crumbled amid problems securing insurance and after many participating teams defected to the new NISA League. We spoke all about that with our soccer correspondent Fletcher Sharp on an episode last week. City says it was required to restructure its 5-member ownership group to meet USSF's professional requirements, but the ownership group remains the same. In a letter to fans, the club says going pro won't affect ticket prices, but it will mean the ability to sign players to full-time contracts. It also means saying goodbye to players like Moussa Gueye, Abdoulaye Diop, Will Perkins, and Hunter Morse, who are still playing for college teams. DCFC's application was one of 3 franchises accepted into the nascent league, along with Chattanooga and the Oakland Roots SC. Other teams already accepted into the league include teams in Atlanta, Los Angeles, Miami, and San Diego. That's it for today's episode, friends. Before we go, wanted to give a shout to our listener in Uganda who recently made the jump over to Daily Detroit from the old Happy Hour podcast. We don't have a name for this listener or much other information, but it definitely caught our attention in the tracking data, and we thank you for listening so much. Thanks to each of you as well for supporting Daily Detroit. I'm Sven Gustafson.
Sven, I'm going to get you an I'm Big in Uganda t-shirt, I think.
I look forward to that.
Well, I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and we'll see you around Detroit.
You're listening to the Podcast Detroit Network. Visit www.podcastdetroit.com for more information.